The Saudis, and I will be slightly generous and say that it was Saudi people, but not the Saudi government in particular, that conducted a terror attack on a U.S. naval base last month, which we talked about that last month. We were pretty worked up about it. They are going to the rest of the Saudi soldiers that were there, that were stationed at that base, are going to be expelled from that base after 40 days. So I'm sure you all remember. Let's see here. I'm sure you all remember last month when we reported on the Saudi terrorist attack at the Pensacola Naval Air Station in Florida that killed 3 American service members and wounded 8 others. This attack was conducted by a Saudi Air Force second lieutenant who was part of a group of Saudis visiting the U.S. to conduct joint training with American forces as part of an American-Saudi Joint Force Treaty. Now, that sounds like a great idea. Other members of the Saudi group who didn't conduct the actual shooting did get caught recording the shooting.
Further investigation found extremist jihadi material and social media posts, as well as child porn on the computers seized by the Saudi officers. Plural, all of them. The investigation into the cause of the attack, according to CNN, they blamed a small number of people, in quotes, who failed to report suspicious behavior by the attacker. Not all of them, just the attacker, apparently, even though they're all suspicious and looking at child porn, apparently. This is bullshit. Just on the face of it, this is completely bullshit. This explanation blaming a few people who didn't report suspicious behavior. You can blame the people who didn't report the suspicious behavior, sure, if you want. But if they had reported the Saudis, they would have been called racist. The PC police would have condemned anyone who dared accuse a person from the Middle East, likely, and this because they do this, they've likely dulled our instincts of self-preservation, much like the many people who ignored the blatant and obvious red flags from the San Bernardino terrorist attackers. They had a bunch of examples, a bunch of people who's like, yeah, that was suspicious, but I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to get called racist. So they just ignored the suspicious behavior and allowed the terrorist attack to happen in the case of San Bernardino. And it's very much likely this is a similar case. The people who are actually at fault are the civilian and military leaders who brought these people to our bases, who and allowed them to be around and allowed them to purchase a firearm, and then gave them access to our men and women in uniform who they have already disarmed, because military members on bases are not allowed to have firearms on them unless they are the military police. So because they were disarmed and they basically allowed this terrorist to have a weapon, they allowed this situation to happen in the first place. No treaty and nothing the Saudis could ever offer us is worth the risk to our military members or our national security.
Yeah, jumping back a little bit to what you just said about being scared to report stuff because of the PC police. It's I don't think that as a terrorist that they could possibly have imagined a better scenario where they are able to terrorize you, and then they've also somehow enlisted powerful people in the American side to also terrorize you, to make sure that you're too scared, you're too terrified to report on them. The terrorists are equally the PC police, and by terrorists I mean that they are terrorizing people, making them fearful of being able to report this stuff. It's really from the terrorist perspective, it's great. From our perspective, it sounds pretty awful. But this is the price that we have to pay for that sort of stuff. Is its lives. Our military and civilian leaders are, in no uncertain terms, have failed our brave warriors. However, the people that are most at fault in this are the Saudi government. They sent jihadis, either knowingly or through extreme incompetence, to attack us here at home. We do not believe for a second that they were not aware of the anti-American views of the attackers. And speaking on that too, the idea that this was a special case, he just didn't like America. In general, the background of this guy seemed like he was pretty average. He was a pretty average Saudi. The average default position of the Saudis is they don't really like America. That's the default view. This guy probably doesn't have any views that are any more extreme than most of the Saudi population. Now, maybe he's more willing to act on it, but that doesn't change what his views were. Right? And that's probably one of the reasons why they weren't able to catch him, because there was nothing to catch. He just looks like everybody else. His views, and I mean looks, but like his views look like everybody else's in the Saudi kingdom, which is. Yeah, we know that. American intelligence knows that. And when you're going to be pulling from a pot that is mostly going to be people who have anti-American views, and then putting them next to our soldiers who are disarmed, I mean that is gross negligence by everybody involved.
Yeah, I completely agreed. I couldn't help but notice that his ID was issued like, what, a year ago?
No, it expires in 2020.
Yeah.
I don't know when it was issued though.
So, but he would have needed a new ID the month of the attack, right? No, this month.
It expired yesterday. I assume that it probably expired before yesterday, like in the system, but that's what it's printed on.
No, it's on the actual day. Like I know my ID expired, and like. Until it was the next day after it rolled over that I couldn't go onto base without getting a new one issued. Yeah.
I'm guessing he's not allowed on base anymore.
He's probably not allowed on base anymore. As I was saying, his ID is expired. He can't get back on. So the worst part of the story has been the American response. The Saudi officers were detained after the attack so that they could be questioned.
And that's the other one. So I mean, he came over here with a whole squad of people.
Yes.
And it was him carrying out the attack, and then one of his buddies was filming the attack, at least one of them. Yes. But he was here with a whole bunch of other people that, it was presumably a squad. Presumably they all knew each other very well.
Yes.
But after the attack, they were just detained and then, continue on with what they didn't do to them.
If it wasn't him, it would have been someone else. The guy with the camera, probably just as okay with committing the act of violence, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not just this guy. All of them had similar opinions about Americans, and yet those were the ones that were sent. And I know that those are opinions held by a lot of Saudis. Maybe we shouldn't be doing joint operations with anyone who hates us that much or has those opinions. Maybe that's just not worth the risk. But regardless, those officers were detained after the shooting. But according to the Pentagon press release from this week, they are only now, 40 days later, being deported back to Saudi Arabia.
Now, to let you guys know how absurd that is. When Dyer and I saw that report, we both went out and tried to confirm, was this a today thing? Like, were they really... Like, we must be wrong. This must be a press release that happened the day after. Like, this couldn't possibly be a live press release 40 days later. We must be mistaken.
Yeah, I checked 3 other sources because I didn't believe, because the first source didn't actually have a date on it, and I couldn't believe that was from 40 days away. I assumed we were looking at an old story. That's exactly what I told Fox, and nope, it's from this week. So why the fuck did we wait a month to send them back? Or better yet, why are we sending them back? If anything, we should be sending them their corpses back via military C-130 strapped to a Moab labeled Return to Sender. Overreaction? Maybe, but they shouldn't be going back to Saudi to be graded as returning heroes given nothing more than a slap on the wrist. They deserve death, the death penalty, and nothing less.
So I've had a lot of thoughts on this since it happened, because it's just very absurd. And I'm not saying this is a false flag incident in the sense that someone in the American government wanted and organized this to happen in this way, that they purposefully organized it so that Saudis would be here to kill American soldiers. I'm not saying it's that kind of false flag. I don't think that. But what I do think is that while the woke officials in the U.S. government might not have actively wanted this to happen, they clearly did not care that it was a possibility that this would result in dead soldiers, that the policy of bringing Saudis here to train on God knows what, that could possibly lead to dead soldiers. They clearly did not care about that. There's nothing in the protocols that were implemented while those people were here. They weren't followed around by guards. They didn't have very much restriction in their access to anything. Clearly, they were able to obtain guns and bring them onto base. So whoever was in charge of coming up with these protocols for how to handle them, they clearly did not care that this just very lax security policy could result in dead soldiers, which is almost somewhat worse than a false flag. It's something different. It wasn't an intentional thing that they did, but it was intentionally negligent that they didn't do anything about it. And AG Barr, Attorney General Barr, he's even using this event. He's using the government's intentional negligence and disregard for our servicemen as a reason why the American people should give up more rights, why we should give up encryption, why the FBI needs encryption backdoors. And that if we somehow giving up more of our freedoms, more of our privacy to the government, that is going, giving up our freedoms to a government that has an active disregard for our safety, somehow that's going to make us all safe. That is the most vile thing I can possibly think of. That, again, it's a false flag in the sense that it was extremely negligent, and that the people who had the ability to make these choices just didn't care. They did not care that this was a possibility. That's what makes it a false flag. It's something that didn't need to happen. And then the government's going to use their negligence to call for, oh, well, you guys need to give up more freedoms. You're a patriot after all, right? If you don't give up your freedoms, you must hate America. Because we're so incompetent that we let you guys get killed, and the only way to make us stop letting people kill you is if you give up more of your rights. Like, fuck off.
Yeah.
It pisses me off.
I've done joint operations with the British, the Germans, the French, Australians, and also Saudis. And I did not like working with the Saudis at all. I also had other country nationals, which I have to call them that now, which just means the locals. I've worked with them on the same base as me. I also don't trust them any further than I can throw them. Though I can kind of throw them a bit of distance. They tend to be smaller. But yeah, I never liked working with the Saudis because I don't like working with people who generally hate us and would like to stab us in the back if they got a chance.
If if you have like a French guy or an Australian guy in your base, like, first off, they're probably going to be pretty chill, especially the Australian guy. But like, if one of them goes nuts, I think that we can probably assume that is a very it's not very obvious how they got radicalized.
It's not supported by the state, is what you're saying.
Yes. Whereas the Saudi, I was not surprised. The only thing that surprised me about the Saudi story after I found about the Pensacola thing, the only thing about that surprised me was that the American government allowed them on our bases in the first place. The fact that they did what they didn't surprise me in the slightest. It seemed like, wow, why is this? I'm almost confused as to how this has not happened more. And reading through some other stuff, it sounds like there is kind of a crime spree of Saudis here in the States, because these guys were just, I think it was 12 of them, and that's out of 500 Saudis that are in the States right now, here on similar training missions all over the country. And they've been on. Go ahead.
My last year at one base, my last base, there was some Saudis that went on the town and raped a couple women on their first few days in the States. That was their reaction, to go rape some white girls. That's the kind of culture they're coming from, and we're bringing that into our country.
And nobody cares. Nobody who can make a difference cares. Clearly, I heard that there was, in addition to 40 days late getting around to deporting these people, there's been discussion about whether or not they should change the policy about carrying on bases that have foreign nationals there. And it's like, well, why does it take these sorts of incidents to institute what seem to me to be very obvious protocols? I mean, does the Air Force only install landing gear after one of the planes crash? I mean, do the ships only install hulls after they sink? Like, I just don't understand why you wouldn't have these very obvious basic safety protocols around having people who hate us. They are not. Again, I bring this up almost every show that we talk about Saudi Arabia. Well, actually, I bring it up every time we talk about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia financed 9/11 less than 20 years ago. Less than, like, this is so recent. It's barely even been a generation since that happened. They just did it. All of these guys that were there for the training, it's highly likely that they were alive at the time that their government, that they had been born after their or before their government had been financing 9/11. They had all been at least 18 years old. That's outrageous. I mean, that is a massive, massive, I don't even, like, security breach. I don't understand it. I just don't understand it.
It's very simple, actually. They put politics before people, before the country.
That's what I was saying before. It's not necessarily that there's anybody in the U.S. government that wanted this to happen, but they clearly did not care that it was a possibility. If they had cared that it was a possibility, there would have been anything that was a pre-existing protocol that could have prevented this.
So Trump and, to a high degree, his advisors wanted to have a deal with Saudi. It was negotiated to allow them to keep putting sanctions on Iran. And part of that, one way that that Saudi would make up the money for not doing trade with someone's already their enemy, they were going to get military training and arms from the U.S. And as the director, the leader of the civilian leaders of our military, Secretary of Defense, didn't tell him, maybe we shouldn't put the lives of our service members at risk for this deal. Maybe you should come to some other agreement. He wasn't brave enough to say no. And then we had the generals below him working in the different branches. It would be, in this case, I'm not sure if it's the Air Force or the Navy. It could have been either one because of the joint operation. Neither of those generals working as said no. They weren't brave enough to say no. That base commander wasn't brave enough to say no. I'm not going to put at risk the lives of my people who directly are under my command. I'm not going to risk their lives for your political goals. That's what happened. There's no gray period here. I know exactly why those people are dead.
It just becomes everybody's fault, and like I said, the FBI investigating it. It's no one's fault, but we do need you guys to give up your privacy so that
those people, they signed up, they volunteered to serve their country, willing to give up everything they have, give up the best years of their lives, and to sacrifice everything if they were called to serve their country. And in their minds, they were doing it to making all these sacrifices to defend their families, the country, and the freedoms and the culture we have here. That's what they wanted to die for, potentially. Definitely what they wanted to fight for. But no, they had no opportunity to fight. They didn't die on a battlefield, in a fair fight. No, they died disarmed by their own government, lambs to the slaughter, and dying for nothing of value. But what value is there in the political goal they had? It is senseless.
Yep. And the only, to the extent that it was wasted lives. There needs to be a call from the military, like your rank and file guys, your boots on the ground kind of guys. To make these deaths have meant something, there has to be significant sweeping policy changes.
And they're walking away alive. What the fuck? Why weren't they all ripped to shreds by the freaking MPs?
Or the doggos. I don't know, man.
Those are MPs too,
I know. They're good boys. Yeah, this I seeing some of the reports about some of the ideas that they've got for policy changes, it pisses me off because I see what they're talking about for policy changes about security around these foreign nationals. It just doesn't. it makes me happy that they're finally doing something about it, but it pisses me off because it seemed like these are such obvious things to do, and I can't imagine for the life of me why they were not implemented prior to this. Again, you put landing gear on the plane before you land it. Like it's pretty obvious that it's going to crash if it doesn't have landing gear. It's pretty obvious that if you invite over people from a country that has hated us for generations, hates us currently,
And you let
finance
them buy a fucking gun.
yes, finance
And
the
ammo.
biggest terror attack that we've ever had in our history. Really in European history, like all of like Western history, like this was the 9/11 was the biggest terror attack. We're just gonna pull them in. That's very frustrating.